I can't stand your religious meetings. I'm fed up with your conferences and conventions. I want nothing to do with your religion projects, your pretentious slogans and goals. I'm sick of your fundraising schemes, your public relations and image making. I've had all I can take of your noisy ego music. When was the last time you sang to me? Do you know what I want? I want justice. Oceans of it. I want fairness. Rivers of it. That's what I want. That's all I want. I'm Chris.
And I'm Tim.
And this is the Deconstruction series. Welcome to the Always More podcast, where we believe there is always more room at the table for honest conversations, meaningful questions, and deeper understanding. And today, we are continuing with our Deconstruction series. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, you probably should before listening to this one.
Just might.
Only because, as we shared in the episode, one of our greatest influences in deconstruction was just listening to people. When we listen and seek to understand, we often disarm ourselves and genuinely search for the truth in the matter. In this episode, we might come across a little more emotional or heated, but we're probably definitely going to come across, we're almost certainly going to come across more emotional or heated, because today we are talking about a topic that is at the forefront of deconstruction. Like, any deconstructionist is going to have something probably, again, heated, to say on this topic, and that is the church, or like many pastors like to correct, the church with a capital C.
And mind you, just because you get emotional doesn't make you wrong. Now, granted, I do know that getting all heated and defensive can make you look wrong, and I've definitely seen that from different parties, but that doesn't necessarily make you wrong.
Yeah,
but
just because you maintain your emotional stoicism doesn't mean you're right.
Oh, he was more polite and collected. He knew what he was talking about. He's correct.
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy to seem correct when you fully believe in your own stupidity, but, moving on from that one.
Moving on.
I think for this entire series, we're probably just going to dive in.
Yep.
There's
Let's
no way to,
just do it, man.
tiptoe into the pool.
I'm diving in. I'm going deep.
I never knew the words to that song, but, it is what it is. It was always a fun music video, too.
Oh, yeah.
So like I said, we're talking about the church, not specifically our churches, but the church.
Yeah.
So let's start with some stats. According to the Gallup poll, which if you've ever taken an internet poll, is probably done by Gallup.
Yep.
They do everything. Americans' membership in houses of worship has continued to decline as of 2020, dropping below 50% for the first time in the 8-decade trend. Not 8 years, 80.
Yeah.
That is 40 years ago.
Yeah.
40 and 1 year ago, technically, because it's the year of our Lord 2021 now, and this was in 2020.
True.
47% of Americans said they belonged to a church, synagogue, or mosque, down from 50 in 2018 and 70 in 99.
Isn't that crazy?
It's understandable, but it's a big dip.
Yeah.
That's all Americans, any house of worship, from 70 in 1999 to 47 only 20 years later.
Just considering the other years, the constant 70%, it's just mind-boggling.
So U.S. church membership was 73% when Gallup first measured it in 1937 and remained pretty close to 70% for the next 6 decades, before beginning a steady decline around the turn of the 21st century. According to the Deconstruction Network, 2,700 people leave the American church every day, and yet 78% of those people claim to retain some level of faith. As we previously mentioned in our last episode, Tim and I are both in that 78%.
Yeah.
In other words, Jesus doesn't seem to be the main problem.
Not the main one anyways.
It's not the problem I have.
No.
No, definitely not the problem you have.
No.
So what is the issue then?
So, as Timothy Isaiah Cho, an associate editor for Faithfully magazine, puts it, one of the sobering things to realize is that Christians and the church are often the leading cause for why people want nothing to do with Jesus. We've got to own that if we aim to be the salt and light in the places we've been called to serve in, end quote. It's just, there were so mere times, and I'll kind of go into this later, but there was so many times in my experience of working at the church where there was this concept of like, well, we've always done it this way, or we've always had to do it this way. I'm like, look, you can have that mentality, or you can even hold on to your fundamental faith things, but here's the truth. People are leaving, and what we're doing isn't working.
So one of my favorite quotes actually is the intro to a song by DC Talk, if you remember.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Bring it back.
This is from the 90s. It's the beginning to the song "What If I Stumble."
Oh.
The greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians
Come
who
on.
acknowledge Jesus with their lips and then walk out the door and deny him by their lifestyle.
Are you sure DC Talk said that?
Oh, yeah. And that is what the unbelieving world finds simply unbelievable.
Man.
That's the problem right there. It has nothing to do with Jesus, the man, the myth, the legend, whatever you want to call him. It's his followers. I think that was Gandhi actually said that as well.
Yeah.
I love your Jesus. Or I love your Christ. It's your Christians I don't like.
Yeah. Today, we want to share our stories about our church experiences, what we have heard and read from others to talk about the issues that a majority of Christians seem to shrug under the rug, and talk about what a healthier church might look like. Let's establish some ground rules, or recognize some common thoughts that I know some people will have throughout this episode.
I think we're probably going to do that in every episode.
I think this is
ground
good.
rules are a good way to start.
Right. Chris, if you don't mind, I'd like to start off with this one.
Please.
Are all churches bad? No.
Oh, we have different answers, I guess. I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding.
But here's the thing. Most American churches either contribute by being a part of the systemic problems, and or they don't recognize, acknowledge, and address the many problems that are now being voiced by so many, in which many leaders call this rebellion or divisive. And I am a first-hand witness to see church leaders deliberately and knowingly ignore said problems.
Yes.
They would rather address issues that either lift them up or side with their political slant.
Yes.
That's what most, from what I've seen, deconstructions, when they're talking about the church, this is the main issue.
Yeah.
You can get into a lot of theological debates, and trust me, there are. But regarding the church itself, it's this.
And I do want to say, like, for some pastors, at least in my experience, it's not even intentional.
That's true.
It just happens.
Right.
Like, they don't realize that that's what they're doing, but if you point it out, like, it's still in their head, just doesn't compute, and they continue doing it.
Yeah. Yep.
It's nothing intentional. It just happens.
Right.
So we're not attacking pastors for doing that.
Yeah.
We're just trying to point out things that are happening.
Agreed.
So the next one. But that's not the church. That's not all churches. That's kind of like in the same vein as, well, not all men.
Right.
Like, look, we know it's not all churches. It's not as simple as Christians make it out to be. If you hold the belief that the church is Christ's bride, that's fine. But we simply cannot let the people or the systems of that bride just commit injustice or use the language of the church, let sin run rampant.
See, this is a further different, because I wanted to address the capital C. It's like, well, this isn't the church. This is not how the church. Like, well, the church, as a large portion of the smaller churches, they're behaving this way.
No, I completely agree. That's not how the church is supposed to be.
Right.
But that's how it is.
Yeah.
That's all we can say on that.
Yeah.
That topic.
And here's the thing: as Christians, we are all part of the system. In the same way that we in the same way where we treat global poverty as the richest nation in the world, we too, as Christians in one of the most religious countries in the world, need to hold our collective selves accountable. But I will say this, Chris, regarding these churches, and most of them don't say anything. But from what I've seen, most of the churches that actually do try to speak up and be accountable and actually actually apologize on behalf of other churches and Christians, most are run by minority leadership.
Ooh.
That's what I've seen.
Ooh.
Homie, I'm as white as can be, and this is not coming from like some left agenda or whatever. The most churches I've seen just apologize, not necessarily even take credit, but just say, "I'm so sorry this happened to you." It's from churches that have minority leaders.
Yep. And not just like black churches, because
No,
obviously
LGBTQ people,
LGBTQ leadership,
Yeah.
Female leadership, black, brown, doesn't matter.
basically churches that aren't held by white males.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
White supremacy and Americana Christianity go hand in hand, and it is hard to separate the two.
Yep.
So if you are not supporting white supremacy, you're more likely to understand the real church,
Yeah.
not Christianity Americana.
Next argument. But what about ...
But whataboutism is probably my favorite argument style on social media right now, because that's all you hear.
Yeah.
It's the straw man argument.
Yeah.
You're setting up an issue to deflect the issue that's actually at hand and lessen that importance. That's like if we're talking about, I think the PlayStation 4 was better than the Xbox One. And then somebody's like, well, I like the Wii U. We're debating these two topics.
Yeah.
Stay over there. We're talking about these two things.
Well, see, what's happened recently is, like, especially with churches, and trust me, if you haven't been hearing about it, you are not listening to the right sources or listening good enough. But there has been many church scandals as of late of leaders physically, sexually abusing others.
Oh, yeah.
And so what will happen is when these things get brought up, especially by those who are deconstructing, usually the argument is like, well, look, you just had someone on the left, Kumo from New York, he did this. And I'm like, yeah.
Fire him too.
No, literally, it's so funny, Chris. Every single person that I've read from the left, I'm like, yeah, get rid of him.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who you are. Get rid of him.
I do the same thing. People are like, well, what about this guy from your party? That's not my party. Get rid of him. I don't care. If he's doing the same things that I'm complaining about, get rid of him. Get rid of all of them. Like, y'all don't understand. I don't worship any of these people.
Yeah, right.
Like, I don't care. If you're doing wrong, I don't care if you're white, if you're black, if you're gay, if you're straight. Like, if you're in leadership and you're abusing your power, you no longer need to be in leadership.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it.
Well, then there's a whole nother level to this as well, is that the church is at a different standard from what the church would say is the world, the secular world.
Yeah. It's supposed to be a higher standard.
Right. And so it shouldn't matter what the world is doing. The world's going to do what's going to do, according to that theology, if that's what you hold. It's going to do whatever it wants. So if we're going to be a church, then we need to hold each other collectively as Christians and as followers of Christ. And so when something does happen, like with Black Lives Matter and with all this stuff, we should be speaking up with our brothers and our sisters that are of color and saying, hey, this stuff isn't right, instead of just saying one small remark that, oh, hey guys, I'm so sorry, please don't riot.
Yeah.
Oh God.
See, things like that, those aren't political issues. And it really bothers me how much politics has seeped into the church.
Oh yeah.
Like, it's supposed to be the separation of church and state. Obviously, one, so the government doesn't run the church, but also so the church doesn't run the government, and the two don't intertwine. You're supposed to be able to have church and the government separate from each other.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a Republican to be a Christian. You don't have to be a Christian to be a Republican. And if I say, hey, I don't like the way that this church is handling this situation, you shouldn't be able to pick a political party for me based on that.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be... We'll get there. We'll get there.
All right, what's the next one, Chris?
Exactly what we were just talking about. You're attacking Christ's bride. So churches obviously are given authority by God. That's been the widely held belief for a long time. A lot of language and emotion might feel like we're attacking these churches because of the way that we're saying things, just to tear them down. And while we would like to see the people that commit actual injustices be taken out of leadership, I would probably argue most of us who have or are deconstructing We're not attacking anyone in particular. We're trying to prevent further harm.
Yeah.
We're coming after the issues and the things that those people are doing, not the people. Again, to use church lingo, hate the sin, not the sinner.
Come on.
So,
Man, isn't that funny how things come around, isn't it?
it is. It can be applied in multiple ways.
So here are things that is from the New Evangelicals. That's an Instagram site. I think they're actually a little bit bigger than just Instagram. But here are 6 undeniable reasons Christianity is under attack in America. You ready for this, Chris?
Oh, Lord.
Number 1, the church brings in over $100 billion a year in tax-free donations. Number 2, there are over 300,000 churches in America. Number 3, the church has its own music industry. Number 4, the church has its own movie industry.
Which sucks.
Number 5, the church has its own book industry.
Which is all right.
And creepy. And number 6, church makes up 90% of the U.S. Congress.
Christians specifically. Yeah. Yeah, that's insane to me. Are you aware that there are some states that have laws still to this day on the books that if you don't believe in God, you cannot hold public office?
Yeah. Guys, a lot of us are upset because the current model of accountability in the American church, by large, hasn't worked.
Mm-hmm.
It's as simple as that. We're asking it to be accountable. And I'd like to take a moment to address the word systemic. I know we all talk about this in our episode about race. I know we'll address this. But as a Christian leader, you cannot tell me that the Bible does not speak upon systemic issues. That's literally the explanation of how sin entered the world.
Oh, yeah.
It's literally how we explain how a baby is sinful.
See, that's what I don't understand about Christians that are like, well, systemic racism isn't a thing because I'm not racist. I never owned slaves. Okay, so you understand the concept of original sin. You're born into a world that is sinful, and it is your job to not sin and to fix the disconnect between you and God.
Yeah.
But you don't understand the fact that you were born into a world that was created by racists, in which white people are on top of society, and it's your duty to bring everything else to reconnect. Like, you can't say you believe in one and not the other. Like,
yeah.
I don't know, man.
Look,
I feel like I'm going to be really frustrated through a lot of this.
I know.
We're not even debating anybody. We're just talking about this between us.
And guys, again, the reason why
you guys,
and the reason why we're already getting so tense about this is because, and what I would argue, a lot of people who are still holding onto their faith, who are deconstructing, is because we have seen and heard and listened to the hurt that the church systemically has allowed to happen.
Yeah,
that's what it comes down to, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are not attacking the bride of Christ. We are not attacking that whatever. We are attacking the accountability that is lacking. We are attacking. Attacking. We are trying to defend those who can't defend themselves, who have been ignored, who have been brushed under the rug, who have not been listened to because they were women, they were minority, they were LGBTQ because their story didn't really matter in the context. Yes, guys. And here, let me say this. A lot of these stories I didn't hear until I chose to listen. You have to choose to listen to these things. If you think it's not a big problem, guys, let me tell you, it's a huge problem. I'm gonna share in the show notes later, but there's an Instagram page I follow where they share stories of people who have gone through pain, hurt, abuse in the church. Guys, it's out there. It's real. We're not making this up. We're not trying to exaggerate the problem. And guys, even if it was just a small, minuscule amount, it should still be addressed.
One is too many.
One is too many. And I guess this is really the last point too. I guess I kept wanting to say the same thing over and over again. But there are some who mock the church, but many of us, like us today, are simply asking it to keep up to her standards.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Look, the way I look at it, if you're a boss at a job, you hire an employee, they're supposed to do something. If they don't do that job, you either correct them or you fire them.
Yeah.
That's the same way we should be with a church. Like, if a church isn't doing the work of Jesus Christ, it needs to be corrected or it needs to be left.
Right.
If it won't correct, it's got to be taken down.
Yeah.
that's exactly what Jesus would do if he were here, and you know it. Don't try to say he wouldn't, because he drove people out of the temple. Like, he made a whip and drove people and animals out of the temple because they weren't doing God's business in the temple.
Yeah. I would like to, before we take a break real quick, I'd like to share one of my, something I think I'll put in the show notes too, is a recommendation to hear just an example of this kind of a story, and that is to listen to The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. I think I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but it's a podcast series about Mars Hill Church and Mark Driscoll. And these issues, and I'm listening to this podcast and so many others that I've been reading comments from people who've been listening to it, we're all saying the same thing. It's like, yeah, it may not be exactly word for word or exactly like this, but there are so many churches that were abusive in this kind of way, or at least resembled it. It's not as, it's bigger than you think. Just let me say it like that. Yeah. Chris, should we take a break?
I think so. We're going to go ahead and head to break for you guys for just a second. Stick around with us. We'll get a little more detailed coming up. I think this is going to be a fun episode. Fun for me, anyway. I don't know if it's going to be fun for everybody, but
we're going to find something to be fun about. All right, we'll be right back.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Thanks for sticking with us through our commercials. I know it's probably going to be a little awkward hearing those like upbeat commercials.
I was just thinking about that.
Maybe we should do some more upbeat deconstruction stuff. I don't know.
Maybe.
We'll come back with a game next time or something.
On our next deconstruction series. What did I miss?
All right, guys. Well, like Tim said a second ago, we're going to get into our stories a little bit about the church. Each little deconstruction topic we're going to touch on is going to first and foremost be from our own personal experience, because that's how deconstruction works.
Yeah.
We're going to touch on these issues in general, but it's important to us that you understand the stories that cause us to feel the way that we do. You kind of get a glimpse into our lives and show you how we got to where we are.
Right.
So what do you got for me, Tim? Let's hear your story first.
All right, guys. As you know, there's no long story short with me. But I'm going to try.
Even if he says it.
Even if I say it. I'm going to try. I'm going to try my best. I categorized this church story, into 3 segments. Okay? Only 3 chapters.
Only 3 chapters.
Now, there might be sub-chapters, but 3 main things here, okay? So, as I mentioned last week, I literally grew up in the church, so I saw a lot. And fortunately, as a child and as a teenager, most of what I remember was good, or at least not explicitly abusive to my understanding at the time. So, moving forward, I want to categorize my church story into 3 parts: childhood, youth group, and working in full-time ministry. So this is going to be the shortest part: childhood. Luckily for me, some of my earliest memories of the church were at a very healthy church with a pastor I still remember very fondly. It was at a church called Praise Christian Center in Beaumont, Texas, and the pastor was Pastor Reggie Lloyd. I was in elementary and 6th grade at this time, but what I do remember was what Pastor Reggie did for his community. He constantly bussed people in to be fed for free. He opened the church for the homeless during natural disasters, which Beaumont is right there by Hurricane Central, so it was often. And he himself served at most, if not all, of their outreach events. So he was the kind of person who put his money where his mouth was.
Those are the kind of people I like. I'm here for those kind of people.
I to be honest, I don't remember all of his theology. Again, I was young, but what I did see from him was that he loved people, and he brought people into the church, not from an agenda, not to try to convince them of anything, but just to be human, just to love them and feed them and to do what Christ has asked us to do. Fun fact, I experienced my first mosh pit at this church.
Nice.
We had this. I don't know how this happened, but our youth pastor brought in, like, they had a tour, like just 3 other like super hard metal bands, and apparently they were Christian. I don't remember or not.
Do you remember any of the band's names?
No, sorry.
Was Dismas one of them?
Yes,
it was Dismas, Turn Off the Stars, Edison Glass, and Oh, what was the last one?
Oh, my gosh.
Finding Forrester.
Oh, my gosh.
That tour was also at Grace Christian.
Oh, my
when I was there
gosh.
before you got there. That's so cool. That's where I found my first mosh pit, too.
Wild.
That's insane. Oh, man. How have we never talked about this?
I don't know.
This is so cool.
It is so
You guys are
neat.
getting a genuine moment from us. I love this. I love this for you. That's
I
awesome.
know.
Yeah, no, I was there. That was my first mosh pit as well. I mean, not the one in Beaumont, but
Right.
that was so cool.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, no, they absolutely were Christian. If you guys are listening to this right now, please go look up those bands. Edison Glass and Dismas were probably my two favorites.
Yeah.
But the other two, I don't remember too much about. But I remember the concert being great.
Oh, yeah.
So, fun
Cool.
times.
Well, there you go. Well, that's ends my childhood part. Moving on to youth group. See, that was a quick first chapter.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so without going into a very long, extensive story of all of my experiences at youth group, let's just go over some of the things that I recognized as rather weird, strange, or just straight up wrong.
Straight up kooky dukes.
Yeah. So some of my best and strangest experiences growing up in youth ministry, youth group, was summer camp. Come on, summer camp.
Yeah, somebody talk about summer camp.
Okay, so a lot of it was good. Most of it, I would say, was good. But there are definitely some things that I recognize now as being like, oh, yeah. And even a lot of us at the time collectively knew this was wrong. Chris, were you there the year that we had this evangelical pastor come by and he recommended that we could laugh in the Spirit?
I remember that vaguely.
That was the weirdest, kookiest thing I've ever witnessed in my life. And what I guess is a good thing is I recognize a lot of people around me thinking the same thing, like, yeah, this doesn't seem right.
Something's off.
Right. And so I remember at this time, this pastor came in and he talked about the Holy Spirit and about speaking in tongues, and basically, if I remember correctly, alluded to that we can laugh in the Spirit and laugh away the enemy and laugh away the problems and to celebrate with God in the midst of things. And he tried to get us all to laugh and in the Spirit, and that was not okay. Very, very, very weird.
Yeah. See, like it sounds like something that would be okay, but it also sounds like it could go far outfield so fast.
Yeah. All right. Next thing, let's talk about probably the not wise choice is to allow just camp in general, having boys and girls that are in the midst of puberty being unattended for long periods of time.
Oh yeah, camps, lock-ins, the whole 9 yards.
Camp boyfriends and girlfriends, that was a phenomenon. Guys, I don't even know how to explain what. Now, granted, I was a good Christian kid, so I didn't do anything horribly wrong, but I definitely witnessed some things, and I'm like, okay, well, that shouldn't be happening, and it was not a good idea. Let me say it like that. If we're going to do camp, we need to be a little bit more supervised. Let me say it like that.
Oh yeah.
Let's talk about worship in youth group. I still have some complex and mixed up feelings about this. So, on one hand, I don't see anything necessarily wrong with using music to worship or to feel a connection with the divine. On the other hand, I have seen and been a part of using music to manipulate emotions, to stimulate a movement of God.
Now, I want to say real quick that that's all music is manipulating emotions and moments, whether they be with God or not. The difference is, though, like, if you're just playing a song to elicit an emotion, sure, I get that. But when you are specifically cultivating an environment and then shaming people outside of that environment and then just pushing this one specific point across, like you turn down the AC,
Yeah.
you set the lights just so, and then when people aren't feeling what you're wanting them to feel, you start shaming them for it.
Right.
That's when it becomes a problem.
Well, and I agree with you, but there's even moments too to where I remember you would, as the worship leaders, you would set up a list of songs, and you would purposely orchestrate it to where it would lead up to this big moment where it's most intense, it's most emotional, and then right after that, you set up the altar call.
Yeah.
That does not feel genuine to me.
No, not at all.
And
that's problematic.
Yeah.
For sure.
And so again, and I'm not saying that every emotion felt during worship is wrong or not even actually spiritual. In fact, there was one time I do remember during a summer camp, and I don't know if you were here for this, but it was after AJ passed away, or he was killed in Iraq, or was it Afghanistan? It was one of the two.
Afghanistan. I'm pretty sure it was Afghanistan. Doesn't matter. Yeah, I was there for 1 year after that, for one summer camp after that.
Okay, well, I think it was a winter camp, but
I was definitely there for winter camp.
Pastor Darrell, our youth pastor at the time, his son was killed in Iraq or Afghanistan, and I remember he would say later on that he was, I mean, obviously going through tragedy and just feeling all kinds of emotions, but I remember we were going through this worship set one night, and the pure, not just emotion on him, but the connection and the reaching out to God and to the divine in that moment was the most realistic moment I've ever seen. It was a father who still mourning his son's death, and a moment where he is calling out to God to just be there with him and to feel with him. So I want to make that clear, because it's not simple. It's not black and white.
No.
There's nothing wrong with using worship, in my opinion, music to worship and to experience God or the divine or Jesus or whoever.
I still do that.
Yeah,
I still have a worship playlist on my phone, even though I haven't been to an actual church for a worship session in a long time outside of the one I just went to on vacation.
Yeah.
Which was my dad's church. That was really nice. But, yeah, the music itself isn't the problem. It's the intentional manipulation behind the music,
right,
that a lot of churches will use.
There you go. Yeah, well said. All right, so moving on, and I'm going to try to brush through this because we're going to have a whole episode about this one. But it's the talk.
Oh, yeah.
The purity culture.
The ring thing.
God,
I hated that.
So one of the biggest origins of mental and spiritual abuse that has come through through the unhealthy teachings within the purity culture of the 90s and 2000s, and I would say mostly to women.
Oh, yeah. Purity culture affects all, but it's a heavier weight swung at women than it is at men, for sure.
I never remember being told to dress a certain way so not to tempt other girls. I remember being told that our urges were good and from God and yet dangerous and cannot be trusted. There were a lot of things that were said that, on one hand, you can go like, okay, yeah, we want to be wise. We don't want to just live frivolously and do stupid things. On the other hand, you don't have to dress a certain way you are not responsible for someone else's lust.
Yeah.
You're just not.
No, absolutely not.
Now, I'll say this for now. There's a book that I'm almost done with titled Jesus and John Wayne that describes in great detail the hidden, or at least to those who grew up in it, reasons why this purity culture was a driving force within churches during this time. And I'll sum it up in one word. It's patriarchy.
Oh, yeah. So the same way that American Christianity goes hand in hand with white supremacy, whether you want to admit it or not, it also goes hand in hand with the patriarchy.
Yeah.
It sets men up to be the head and women to be submissive to their husbands and blah, blah, blah. There's all kinds of problems. And that's, again, not all churches, we know. But it is very problematic. And the churches that follow these purity culture lessons, basically, will put boys and girls in separate rooms. And they'll say, to the boys, hey, when you get married, you're going to have sex and it's awesome. High five.
Right.
And then they take women and they're like, look, if you have sex before you're married, you are useless. You're worthless. You're damaged goods. Nobody's going to want you. Nobody's going to love you. And everything's going to go wrong for you for the rest of your life. If a guy has sex outside of marriage, it's like, oh, that's a sin. Moving on.
Yeah.
But like for women, virginity, which I also believe is a social construct, is tied to their worth.
Right.
And if they're not virgins, they're not worth anything. And they're useless. And it's very damaging to tell women that, to tell anyone that specifically, but it's targeted at young, vulnerable women on purpose.
And guys, hear us out. It may not have been said that way, which I'm sure it has been said that exact way before, but it was demonstrated that way through illustrations, through different examples. That's what, especially like if you talk to my wife, you'll hear that kind of like, yeah, I remember hearing something like
Or
that.
if you talk to my wife.
Yeah.
Yeah. Separate churches, by the way. My wife and your wife went to separate churches,
Yeah.
and they have the same experience. So I know it's not just one particular church.
Yeah. Moving on. And now I'm in my third chapter. Now working at the church. Here we go. I'd like to circle back to a word. I'd like to circle back a second to a word that I discussed in last week's episode. Fundamentalism, which again is a religious movement characterized by a strict belief and literal interpretation of religious texts, especially within American Protestantism, and Islam. And to make fundamentalism worse, especially at my church, a lot of pastors believe that it was there's the people that they agreed with that just affirmed their own beliefs, interpretation of Scripture is foolproof.
Yeah. Inherent, 100% correct.
Yeah.
Given to them by God.
Here are some signs of fundamentalism, especially within the church, that I read from Michael Gungor. He says, number one, questions are shamed.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a big one. Number two, dissonance or disagreement is seen as a threat.
My childhood.
Number three, some sort of purity is important, whether it's language, action, belief, or etc.
Mm-hmm.
Number four, some information is seen as dangerous in itself.
Also my childhood.
And number five, scapegoating. They
Ooh,
are the problem.
the almighty they.
He continues here to say, if you find yourself afraid to be yourself truly, to speak, to create, to wrestle with, to love, to doubt, however you need to, you are likely in touch with some form of fundamentalism. Now, I can probably hear, because this was my thoughts back in the day, that it's like, well, you're just pushing that to the extreme. No. This is more widespread than you speak, especially if you haven't worked in a church. A lot of these things were used as excuses to have control.
Oh, yeah.
That's what it comes down to,
Yeah.
is for the leader to have control. I can definitely attest to creatives. We spoke to some friends of ours a few weeks ago that have been through this process. So the reason why I wanted to bring this up again is because at that time I didn't have the language to call out what it was I was witnessing in our church leadership, but I would later understand it, and I would understand it as an emotional and spiritual abuse in the form of fundamentalism. Now, I'm not saying that if you have a foundational belief in something that makes you a abuser necessarily, but I will say that in my experience, having a fundamentalist mentality makes it far easier to ignore people's hurt, sound logic, and other people's experiences, or even other interpretations of Scripture, and I'm definitely going to bring that up later.
Yeah, please do.
I started as a youth ministry assistant serving under a youth pastor who would quickly come under a lot of scrutiny because he and his family didn't resemble what the leadership thought what a proper pastor household should look like. And after a couple of years serving under him, I would later be promoted to the youth pastor position. I would like to make a moment to criticize this decision to promote me to youth pastor.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have been a youth pastor.
No, I agree.
Guys, I didn't have a theological degree.
Didn't have any degree.
It's true. Granted, I was raised in the church, and I understand the mentality was, well, he served in the church, he's given so much to the church, his dad is a pastor, all these different things. Looking back at it, that I just shouldn't have.
Should not have happened.
So when I first started, I was given a fair amount of leeway in how I ran the ministry and how I wanted the youth to function. But over time, rather as leadership grasped harder onto their fundamentalism and or as I fell out of favor with the leadership, my opinion and influence would diminish. And to be honest, I wasn't sure where to start or how to do this without turning it into a 3-hour episode. So here are a few things I saw within our church that I would begin to recognize as not only horrible leadership, but also spiritual abuse. Now, leadership, mind you, I'm not just saying this because I feel like I was wronged, okay? I'm not saying this because I feel like me personally I was wrong. There's actually a long list of people who had been, and some who still are being mistreated. In fact, most of my frustration within the last couple of years of my employment was about the mistreatment of others because at that point, I was kind of ignored.
Yeah, kind of left on your own to do your own thing.
I really was. They didn't care about me. Anytime they wanted to talk to me, they used a middleman.
Yep.
That's what it came down to. So even if you are a Bible-affirming Christian who is an evangelical, here are my core reasons why I believe my church was the epitome of what is going wrong for the American church. Number one, and here's I'll just give you the three reasons right off the bat. I'll go into it in detail. Number one, it was influence-based. Number two, it was money attendance-driven. And number three, it was authority-focused.
Now, I'm going to jump in on your influence-based thing real quick because I was telling my dad recently about your church because he knew a few of the people that are now in positions of power. And I mentioned that, hey, one of the guys in leadership is this guy's friend. And my dad just right off the bat was like, oh, you mean this guy? My dad doesn't even live in the country anymore. And he knew exactly who I was talking about before I brought up any names.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, that's an interesting choice.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, well, there you go.
Now, before I move on here, because I realize I'm getting a little louder, I'm getting a little bit more emotional, I recognize that. I recognize that I'm getting a little more emotional. Look, the person that I would address this to, if I wanted to, is not going to be listening to this episode.
That's fair.
And this is not, this could be me ranting a little bit, but again, this whole point of this series is to let others know that if you're in these situations, you're not alone. And I'm trying to, the reason why we're listing all these things out is so that way we can maybe possibly let someone know who experiences maybe just one of these things. So, a reason why I believe this was the epitome of what was going wrong with the American church, influence-based. The leadership worshipped the opinions of those they liked and no one else. There were too many times to count of times where people within the staff would bring up ideas or opinions to the table that were ignored, or yet once they heard the ideas let me start over. They might have heard it, they ignored it, but then once it was brought up from one of their favorite pastors, their favorite churches, then, it was the holy grail of ideas.
Right. It's like watching Timon and Pumbaa. What if he was on our side? No, that's a dumb idea. But wait a minute, what if he was on our side?
Also, within the topic of influence, most ideas that seem strange, often coming from the younger people on staff, would widely be dismissed until, again, it would be suggested from a megachurch leader that they liked. And I could spend a whole episode about that. But next on, money and attendance driven. This is just as simple as it sounds. The goal of our leadership was to bring in the money. In fact, if you were to look at the trend of the church over the years, you could plainly see what we recognized over time was the church was pampering to local government or community leaders to entice them to come to our church to bring in their tithe.
Mm-hmm.
Remember earlier I mentioned Pastor Reg and where he spent his time.
Yep.
With the community, the homeless, the poor, that kind of thing.
Opposite for this church.
In fact, I'd actually heard on numerous accounts from various people who had higher standing with leadership, that this was the goal of our leadership. The mindset, more money allows us to save more souls.
But when is it enough money?
And there goes the problem. It's never enough.
Like
it just
obviously you want to save as many souls as possible. That's kind of the whole goal of Christianity in a nutshell when it comes to them. But isn't one enough? Isn't two enough? Like, why do you need to focus on getting more money to save more souls? How about you just focus on the souls and use the money that you're given? That's the whole principle of tithing. That's the whole principle of the 99 sheep versus the one with the shepherd. Like, he'll leave the 99 to go after the one that needs help.
Right. Yep. So by far the focus and what would end up being the excuse for my departure was numbers. How many butts can we get in the seats? The metrics were all about tithe-giving families.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of years into my position as youth pastor, where I still had some kind of leeway or some kind of what's I'm looking for, favor, we all went to Gateway Church to find a new direction and focus for our church. And given that our leadership was very set in their ways and known only as really enforcing ideas that benefited older mindsets, it came to me as a surprise that when we chose a new lead pin, which is essentially the first group of people we wanted to attract to the church, we labeled them as the young professionals with families and kids. Now, that might sound somewhat kind of cool, like, hey, cool, so we're reaching out to millennials with families and kids and that kind of thing. That's nice. And it sounded nice at first, but here's what happened is over time, as we thought we were going to be asked as millennials for our ideas about how to attract said millennials, our ideas got shut down.
Oh, yeah.
one after another, it became apparent that the intention wasn't to attract the young families with kids. It was to attract the young professionals with money.
Yep. I saw that coming from a mile away.
At the point of my departure, only a few things have been allowed to change due in large part to things being called out within the staff. Look, you can look at the trends. I could, if you were to have a conversation with me about, I could show you our budget and how that looked like, and how it resembled this logic. But here's the last thing: authority focused, and I cannot overstate this. Every single thing was about blind obedience to authority. Any talk about leadership was considered demonic in forms of witchcraft. They may not have said that, but with the scripture they were quoting, it sure did sound like it.
Was it rebellion is as of witchcraft?
Come on. So leadership would hide behind their title as an excuse to diminish others' opinions or thoughts about how they really were within the staff. And I'll share this one story. And this is okay. So this is around the time in my deconstruction where I still believed that homosexuality was wrong. I was questioning it, but at this point in time, I did believe that the church was handling it wrong for sure. Like, I knew that we were not handling it wrong. And at this time, our leadership decided to go into a series about hard topics, and one of those topics was going to be about LGBTQ+. And the leadership had asked me to preach a message about it, particularly this message. It wasn't everything else in the series, but especially this one. And so within that, I knew it was coming. And so I had shared with leaders that served in the youth ministry, like, hey, there's a series coming up. I'm thinking about trying to do it differently, trying to do it in more small groups. So that way we can at least have conversations with people about it. So that way we could not just me be on a microphone telling you what's right and wrong, but rather just have a conversation, more direct. That was it. Well, what would happen was I would get called into a meeting with my father, who was technically my boss, and the leadership, and I would be questioned as to, one, did I think homosexuality was wrong, and number two, why I was trying to essentially refuse doing what the pastor wanted. So I decided, and knowing where this was coming in, I brought in a passage of scripture, and it was in 1 Corinthians 9, and basically it was showing how Paul was changing his methods depending on who he was talking to. And my point was, like, look, if you want me to preach this, I'll be obedient, I'll preach this to them, but I'd like to change it up to make it easier for young ears to hear, to relate better, to allow them to be a part of the conversation. And essentially, it didn't matter to them.
Nope.
They wanted
that fire and brimstone.
They wanted
if
it
you're
their
gay,
way.
You're going to hell.
What I heard was, I just need you to know that you'll do what I ask. My experience didn't matter. My expertise didn't matter.
The fact that you know these kids on a personal level doesn't matter.
My intentions didn't matter. And fair point, the Bible didn't matter at this point.
Nope.
I could go on and on regarding the many issues of leadership within this church. Women pastors, like my mother, were only given a title but no real authority. Only the boys had a special place refurbished to be a launching point to go out hunting and rock climbing. Exaggerating attendance numbers, employees being forced to sign non-disparagement agreement after being fired to receive a severance package, conversations with staff members about not tithing, and a lot more. But I'll end with my ultimatum. But before I do that, I want to acknowledge that not everything in my church experience was bad. I know, obviously, I kind of come across a little heated here, but there were people who were amazing, incredible leaders, like Michael Miller and Sarah Wrench. People who genuinely cared about people like Michelle Miller, Melissa Lucas, Carlos Hernandez. Creatives who gave all to their work, even when it was often rejected, like Robert Edwards and Jordan Bailey. Pastors that loved me and my family, like Mike and Vivian. And people like my assistants, Charlene and Misty, who worked far more hours than they ever should have. And people like Tim and Kyra Jude and Aaron Tucker, who served loyally and who stood up for character. And so many volunteers that served alongside me that were incredible human beings who gave up so much of their time and energy to love teenagers who often didn't even care. and those that held on as long as they could because the church was family, like my parents. What came down for me leaving Grace, I knew that I didn't want to be there for a while. But as we mentioned in the last episode, when it comes to deconstruction, it's hard. It's hard leaving.
Yeah.
You grew up with this family that you created, with people that you care about, people that loved your kids.
Yeah.
What sealed the deal regarding my intentions on employment at this church essentially started with how my parents were treated. My dad, who made the children's ministry what it was and made it flourish, and what I would argue was the reason why the church got so big, his opinions didn't matter anymore to a certain point.
Right.
He and my mother, like I mentioned before, my mother was a pastor by title only, really. And the list goes on. Essentially what happened was towards the end of the year last year, they went to Gateway again because they are the holy people. And essentially they were told that they should make a list of people that they felt like maybe didn't belong there, or maybe need to figure out where they need to go. And I was one of those people. And so they gave us a test to take that would essentially, we would decide, the test essentially helps you try to figure out where you want to go in life. And the intentions, it could be good if not for the situation, if it were not to actually try to get someone out of the position.
To get you out of where you are.
And essentially it would help you rather, okay, do you belong in this position? If so, if that was the test result, if yes, you still want to be in this position, well, then you have 6 months to change and to meet our goals and expectations. If not, we'll help you find another place to go.
Right.
Or if the test shows that you don't want to be in this position, or you feel like you're going a different direction, we'll still help you figure out a new place to go.
It's basically to get you to quit so they don't have to fire you.
Yeah. So I chose. They're granted 100%. Chris was the one who helped me get out of there. Gave me an opportunity to work somewhere that was not toxic. And even though I'm not currently employed there for my own choice, I'm extremely grateful. And I've told Chris this many times, and I felt, it sucked to leave the way I did. Granted, it's COVID, so we couldn't celebrate and do the things that we would do otherwise. But man, I've been at this church since 2004. Grown up in it, served in it, had kids, became youth pastor, all these different things. I didn't leave because I was just mad. In fact, I'd given up my anger about a year before my quitting because it was consuming us. We left because it was unhealthy. We left because this was the epitome of what we had seen from the rest of the American church, that this is not right here.
Mm-hmm.
We started beautiful friendships. We started great things, but we knew that we had to get out. And so we did. And that is my church experience.
There's so much there to unpack. Yeah, man. I understand. That's okay. Sorry, I'm trying not to cry over here. Like the thing is, I was there with you through these conversations, through these topics, through you having to preach on subjects that you didn't necessarily agree with just because they said so.
Yeah.
I remember having these conversations with you, at which point I was already a pretty good way into my deconstruction, and I was ready to fight anybody. I'm still ready to fight. Look, if you are listening to this just to crap on Tim, come at me. I'll give you my address. You pull up to my house. We'll fight. I'm not down with watching my best friend be abused, and I had to for a long time. Obviously, you're not being beaten by your head pastor, but aren't you? Aren't you though? Spiritually, it takes, I'd say, arguably more of a toll than almost any other kind of abuse. because spiritual abuse doesn't just attack your body or your finances. Like, it's every aspect of who you are as a person, because they raise you to believe that everything you do it as you do unto the Lord. So you're giving your time, your money, your effort, your body, your soul, basically, to this organization. And sometimes they can just really misuse you.
Yeah.
Misuse it.
Now, I do want to say, I didn't write this down, but again, just like everything else, it's not as simple as even what I just told. We had great experiences at this church.
Yeah.
We had blessings in the fact that I had a job that was able to provide for me and my family. I was extremely grateful. I still am. I looking back, I think not just one, I shouldn't have been hired, but number two, we were definitely paid way too much. But I am grateful for that. I'm grateful for giving that
paid enough.
I'm grateful that I was given the opportunity. And the reason why I stuck out so long is because I felt like I was under my own obligation to leave the youth ministry with it being better than how I got it.
Right.
And unfortunately, and not to make excuses, but I just felt like I couldn't get there with what was given to me. There was too many. The price wasn't worth it.
Yeah. I get that fully.
So, did you have anything you want to share with your church experience?
Yeah. Actually, I do. So my church experience was somewhat similar. Obviously, like I said, I wasn't a youth pastor, and my parents were not pastors. But the church you finished at was the church I started at.
Yeah.
So when I was about, I want to say 3-ish, 2 or 3 years old, my family moved to Killeen, Texas, and we started going to that same church, Grace Christian Center. I remember very fondly so many of the people that I interacted with, be they pastors or not. It was, for all intents and purposes, a great church.
Yeah, yeah.
I went to elementary school at the academy that they had. I met a lot of my friends there. I have great formative memories. I learned a lot about the Bible and about God, who he is, who he truly is.
Yeah.
It was a mostly positive experience. And that's the weird thing. Like, most people that are deconstructing, you only hear the negatives, the horrible things that they dealt with, the abuses, all of that stuff.
You see the 1-minute TikTok videos. And
yeah. But, like, my experience in church overall was really, really good. Like, I really lucked out for my experience. I remember there was I guess she's older now, if she's even still alive, I don't know, Miss Betty.
Yeah.
The Asian lady.
Oh.
Not Lucas, is a different lady.
Oh, I don't know.
She was really nice to me. Miss Bourne, I remember Miss Bourne was really cool. Miss Ross, I know she passed away recently.
Yeah.
All kinds of really cool people helped raise me with what I would, church or not, I would say are good morals, good values. I was, like I mentioned in the last week's episode, I was on some of the ministry teams that we had worked with starting in like first grade. Like I was on the puppet team. I was on the first graders praise team and all kinds of cool stuff. Memory verse challenges. Like we did all kinds of really fun events. I was always part of setting that stuff up, helping the other kids in anything that they needed. My family did a lot of volunteering. So any kind of outreach that the church had going on, we were there. Thanksgiving meal giveaways and Christmas toy drives and Easter egg hunts for the community. Like we were always doing that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Going through youth group, like you mentioned earlier, Pastor Darrell was probably one of the most formative people in my life.
Right. Yeah.
Got me through a lot of issues that I had personally. Helped me find ways to what I now know as deconstruction, but then was just to explain why I believe what I believe and to learn a little bit more about the in-depth reasonings behind it, to connect better with God. Because, like I said, I do remember that night watching Pastor Darrell just lose himself in worship. Like that still sticks out in my mind.
Yeah.
Because it was a father that lost his son connecting to a father that lost his son.
Oof.
Like he understood better than anybody else in that room at that moment what God went through when Jesus gave himself to the cross. And you can see he was mad, he was hurt, he was confused, but he also wasn't taking it out on God.
Yeah.
And that, because of that experience, I think that's how I handled my entire deconstruction. Because I did receive some abuses that were systemic and things like that. I have reason to be hurt. For example, I'm sure you went to many like healing nights where they called in evangelical pastors from other churches, or like touring pastors, or evangelists is what they are.
Right.
Where they come into your church and they do like one service, and then everybody gives them a bunch of money, and then they just go off to the next church and do the same thing.
Yeah.
Those are like the healing sermons usually, where they come in and they pray over you, and they're like, oh, if anybody has this issue, come on down to the altar and we'll pray over you and we'll get this issue fixed. For those of you that don't know, I am type 1 diabetic, which occurred when I was 5 years old. I had a bad reaction to the varicella vaccine, which is a chickenpox shot, where I ended up in the hospital. I got chickenpox anyway, which is the thing that pisses me off the most. And then I got diabetes because the chickenpox vaccine looks a lot like an enzyme that your pancreas produces, so it caused my white blood cells to attack the vaccine and then that enzyme, and then eventually it killed my pancreas.
Wow.
So it's in my body, it's just useless.
Yeah.
So I am completely insulin dependent, type 1 diabetic, have been since I was 5 years old. And I cannot tell you how many times I went down to the altar to pray that God would take away my diabetes. And they were always like, oh, you know, if you just have enough faith, then God can do anything. If you give yourself to God enough, if you're doing this, if you're doing that, then God can do anything. I did all of those things.
Yeah.
I was at the church all the time. I believed with all of my heart. I gave so much of myself, so much of my time, my effort, my money, everything to these pastors and these churches that said if I only did this, I would be healed. And I don't think they realize how damaging it is. And if they realize, they don't care.
Yeah.
Which is, it's really hard to bring up, to say things like that to really anyone, but specifically to these churches. These are the kinds of abuses that people deal with in their day-to-day lives. And when you're on staff at a church, it's easy to get lost in the work and not connect to the people. But as a volunteer, my whole job was to be the middleman between the church staff and the people.
Yeah.
So I'm living my story, also hearing all of these other people's stories, and then just seeing churches not care about it. Like as I got older, as I got into the different ministries, seeing it not be handled, not be dealt with, seeing people losing their faith because of situations that I just can't seem to get away from myself. And I'm just like, well, maybe their faith just wasn't strong enough. You know, maybe if I'm a little bit stronger, I won't lose my faith. And now I realize it's because they were reacting to abuses.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a huge tangent. Going from the youth group to my new church. We'll start there. So at one point after Pastor Darrell left, there was another pastor that took over, Pastor Eric, that personally I had no problems with, but my mom was his ex-wife's best friend at the time, and my mom had problems with him being in leadership, so she took it to your church's leadership at that time, who was Pastor Terry.
Yeah.
And essentially, she gave them an ultimatum that was like, well, if you don't fire him, we're leaving. And, I mean, they'd already made the decision as a church to have him as a pastor. They can't backtrack that for one family, and we're not even like a rich family, so it's not like we were bringing in millions and millions of dollars. So we ended up leaving the church, or what I was always told is kicked out. So I guess it depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
It could have gone one way or the other. I'd see both stories happening, truthfully. So I was not allowed to go to that church anymore by the church or by my parents, doesn't matter. So we started going to a new church, Faith Point, where I met my lovely wife, and I also had all kinds of positive experiences. I became real close friends with the head pastor's son, Corbett. We went to school together. He was a real cool dude.
I know that guy.
Yeah, that's a cool guy. Right? So I met my wife, met my future in-laws and all of that, built some really strong friendships that still to this day I talk to these people. We interact. This church is where I was technically not on staff, but I was the youth director. I was running the...
You were giving the energy of a youth pastor without getting paid as a youth pastor.
Exactly, yeah. So, again, being taken advantage of without realizing I was being taken advantage of because I was volunteering my services and my time. I don't regret doing any of that. I regret some of the things that I told some people, some of the sermons I taught, some of the different things that I believed at the time, but I don't regret giving my energy or time to the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
Maybe specifically that church, but not the kingdom of God. That church, like I mentioned in the last episode, had a close working relationship with a group called Masters Commission USA, which is technically a cult. It's a next level discipleship program is what it technically is called, where basically anyone who is out of high school can go, and they have age limits and all kinds of things like that. It's specifically for young adults. But you can go and be immersed in church leadership, in Christianity, and the kingdom of God is what they teach. So you're learning basically how to run a church, how to run a Christian college, how to be a minister. You take college courses through a non-accredited college, which is why my degree is useless. You learn discipleship. You go into in-depth study of the Bible. You have to memorize like 250 scriptures. Is it 250? No, I think it's 500 actually. 500 verses. And they can be consecutive or not, doesn't matter. But you have to memorize the Bible, basically, which I still have my little notebook where I kept all of my verses and everything written out so I could easily read and remember and all that stuff. We did literally an hour of prayer every day. And, again, I had a really positive experience, which you don't hear a lot of when you're reading the stories that come out of this program. I attribute that to God protecting me and who I am, because he knew if I did have a negative experience, I could go far left, because I've had a lot of negative experiences.
Yeah.
Like growing up, my mom used to spank me to scripture. Like she would read me a Bible verse and then spank me when I did something wrong.
Oh, Jesus.
So like it's amazing that I still believe in God.
Golly.
My wife always says that, like, I'm amazed that you still pray, like that you still listen to worship. Like, I don't know. It is what it is. So I memorized 500 verses. I wrote spoken word poetry for this program. I wrote some worship music, and I did the leadership programs that they put in place. I did the worship team. I literally led thousands of people in worship sessions all the time.
Yeah.
Like I was on stage with the rest of the worship team, just leading thousands of people at any given moment. They were like, hey, you got worship tonight, 3 songs, go, go, go. So we just, okay, cool. And that was like a normal thing for us.
Right.
Hour in prayer, in and out of season, we were ready to serve. Like to this day, you can hand me any object and I can preach a sermon on it. That's one of my favorite things we did. Looking back on it, hella creepy. But they would just they'd like throw us a candy bar and be like, hey, preach a sermon on this Snickers. And you're like, well, I'm sure you guys understand, when you're with God, you're full. But when you're not with God, your body is, your soul is empty, so you're hungry. You're hungry for the bread of life. And as Snickers says, you're not you when you're hungry. Like off the cuff, I just did that right there, so you can see. Yeah, so like we were like touring, doing evangelism tours ourselves. I was praying over people that needed healing, knowing in myself that I also still needed healing.
Yeah.
But maybe if I can pray for someone else, then that will reflect back on me and I'll get my healing eventually. Another one of those abusive thoughts that just kind of locks in. This Master's Commission ministry, again, if you have a positive experience through it, is really growing, because I did spend an hour in honest prayer every day, and my hour in prayer was truly with God. It wasn't for anyone else.
Right.
I spent time with God. I spent time reading my Bible.
Was that a genuine
Out
desire?
of genuine desire to grow closer to God, to understand his word and understand who he is and who he needs me to be. All of that really gave me an in-depth view on who Jesus Christ is. And again, that was probably when my biggest push of deconstruction started, because I noticed like the church isn't who Jesus is, even though that's what we're supposed to be. I watched a couple of churches rise and fall in my short time at Master's Commission. Like I saw churches start, I saw churches collapse, I saw people fall apart. Master's Commission had to leave the church they were at due to money issues. Like the church couldn't support Master's Commission and the church, so Master's Commission had to move on to a different church, and all kinds of craziness aside. My experience with the church overall, I would still say to this day, was positive.
Yeah.
Like obviously they took advantage of me, my time, my efforts, my money for sure, and all of that big thing, but overall, positive experience. So when I left Master's Commission, I went back to the church that I was with. I met my wife at Faith Point. That was when we were put in charge of the youth group, like officially. We were in charge of the middle school ministry. Her brother, who is an actual pastor, also went through Master's Commission. I'm sure he'll tell you similar things. Like it was absolutely culty, but he had positive experiences. He was the actual youth pastor, and we were like under him for the middle school ministry. Like we led them as different youth groups, but it was all under the youth banner. Eventually we got to a point where we stopped meeting at the church building that we had because we were building a new church. We had sold the property, used that money to start building the new building in a different location. And we got put on different teams for that. That was really an interesting experience, not positive or negative, just interesting. And then we started seeing, there was a dip in tithing at the church. So because the people that were supposed to be tithing, like the big ministers there, didn't agree with the selling of the property, so there was a big split at the church. And, anytime there's a split, whatever side you stick with seems like the right side in your head. So, they were like, oh, well, we split because that's what God wanted. We need to lose some dead weight, and now we're better than ever, which, I mean, sure, we just sold the property for millions of dollars. Obviously, we're better than ever.
Yeah.
So we ended up staying at that church for a while. But a lot of things that didn't affect me directly, I started seeing, like Janelle's family was being taken advantage of and being really hurt by leadership at the church. Some people that I was friends with also said the same thing, like they're being abused, being ignored, being hurt, those kinds of things. And it really bothered me that nothing was being done about it. The biggest push for us was when Josh, Janelle's brother, stepped down from being the youth pastor. His reasons are his own. I'm not going to speak for him, but he stepped down from being the youth pastor and stopped going to the church at the same time. And this was during COVID, so Janelle and I were already not physically at the church because they'd stopped doing in-person sermons and things like that. Not once did any of the pastors reach out to us, though. Like, I'd been there for years, We got married in that church building, Janelle and I. We'd been working with them. We'd done everything with them. But they felt, I guess, as soon as Josh left, that nobody in Josh's family was any longer part of their problem or their solution.
Yeah.
They just completely ghosted us. To this day, I've only heard from one of the pastors, and that is the head pastor's son, and that's because we were friends.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Since then, we've been on our deconstruction journey, and I always joke with Tim, I'll take any opportunity I can to crap on a church. But the truth is, I don't hold ill will towards churches. I just want them to be what they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
I want them to be who they say they are.
Yeah.
Not who they actually are.
Right.
Like, again, you can acknowledge Jesus with your lips and walk out the door and then deny him by your lifestyle. Like, that's what I've noticed in a lot of churches. And even when it is unintentional, when the pastors aren't like thinking that that's what they're doing, that's what they're doing.
Right.
And they're hurting people that way.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that the people that I interact with understand that I have a good amount of biblical knowledge. If you want to ask me questions, I can talk you through the topics I understand, and I can put you in directions to get knowledge on the topics I don't. I don't want to say that I can be a church. I can just give you knowledge. But I do want to be a safe place.
Right.
For questions, for conversations, for people that just want to talk and need to be heard. I want to do the job of the church because that's what Jesus called us to do.
Yeah.
On our own personal lives and as an actual church, we're supposed to feed the homeless, feed the hungry, house the homeless, take care of the widows and the children, support our brothers, support our sisters, be there for everyone, be a community, and show love. Jesus said that the two most important commandments are to love God first and foremost, and to love your neighbors as yourself. And I've not seen that in the church.
Yeah.
Which is why I no longer attend church. Obviously, if I found a church that did that, I would absolutely love to be there.
Yeah.
I'm not saying all churches are bad. I just don't have access to one that I believe is doing what a church should do.
Yeah.
So that's my church experience in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So
that's good, man. The hubris of the American church, where they believe
astounding.
that what we have now is what the church was 2,000 years ago. And I'm not even talking about the moral corruption that it is today, but I'm just talking about physically what it was 2,000 years ago. Not even close.
Yeah.
Not even close. It's...
They met in people's houses. They avoid getting stoned.
Yeah.
That was it. And
I'm not saying that's how it should be or that's how it should be stuck in, but my point is that there's this mindset that this is how it's always been. And that is so far from the truth.
Oh, absolutely.
You look at the 2,000 year of the church with the capital C, it has never looked like how it is in the past 40 years.
Nope.
And so...
These traditional values are actually the newest values.
Yes.
Like the concept of hell, let's just talk about that for a second.
Oh.
The concept of hell is fairly recent.
Yep.
Like it is not as old. Like the
No.
Jews that started the church didn't believe in hell.
No, trust me, I have a whole segment about that on the Bible.
We'll get there. I'm just saying, like, for the sake of argument, like, the traditional values you thought were the traditional values of the Christian church weren't even a thing until recently.
Guys, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I can't. I'm almost done, but I cannot recommend enough this book, Jesus and John Wayne. It is about how the American Christian church is now. It shows how it is now entwined with the Republican Party. Right. And I'm not saying everything on the Republican Party is wrong. There's still things that I sort of kind of agree with.
I think I'm on like 2% of what they say, but
my point is I'm not saying that it's inherently evil or wrong or whatever. My point is that they will blindly follow that platform.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And this book really depicts how it got there, and it was done within the last 100 years.
Oh yeah.
These platforms, these theologies, these mindsets hasn't been the mantra of what is now the American church for thousands of years. It's very recent. And now, to what Chris was saying at the very last part about going to church, I would agree with him. There's not a church that I can think of that, there's very few, that I would be super like, yeah, I want to go to. And there are some that I found online that I'm actually going to put in the show notes because, I mean, granted, they're elsewhere, but they're good churches to follow if you feel like you've been hurt by the church, but you still want to be somewhat involved.
And I do that. Like, I follow pastors and churches on TikTok, and I'll listen to their podcasts. I'll listen to their sermons online. But physically in our area, it's hard to find those.
Right.
We are in the South. And
let me say this, guys. This is coming from someone who has, I guess all of us in a way, we've been brought up in the church. If you don't even agree with everything that we've said so far in this series, it is still okay for you to take a break from church.
Yeah.
Guys, it's been a hell of a year. 2019, 2020 has sucked in many, many ways. It's okay to not feel obligated to go to church. That's okay. You can take a mental break. Your church will be fine without you. Your pastor will be fine without you. If you need that time, take that time.
Unless you're the pastor, in which case, just take a sabbatical. It's the same thing.
Guys, we got a few more things to say, but we're going to take a quick break, and we'll finish up this conversation.
We are back, guys. Thank you so much for sticking with us. If you have, if you haven't, we'll see you in another episode.
I'm sure.
So come crap on us in our comment section.
There you go.
Yeah, so I think we'll just get back into it. So here's some of the things that we have or that we are deconstructing from within the church, or things that we've seen that are wrong that are not on a large scale being addressed or fixed.
Right. And some of these things are things that we didn't firsthand witness. And that's the whole part behind deconstruction, at least on my end, is like a lot of it, dude, I'm a white male. I have it easy.
Straight white male.
And so it's important that I listen to people who are not like me because they might be experiencing things that I'm not experiencing. So like we've been saying this whole episode, we had pretty decent church upbringings, like for the most part.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that there weren't people who didn't have that kind of stuff, who didn't have a positive experience through church. Right. And so that's what's angered people like Chris and I, where we just go, okay, I want to speak up for these people, and I want to address it because the church is not doing it on a large scale.
It's like I was fine when I realized, well, this was wrong, and this was wrong, and how it affected me. But when I started realizing that it was other people being hurt, I think that is part of Christianity. Like, even with Jesus, like, you can abuse him all day long.
Yeah.
But when you start hurting his disciples or his flock, that's when he really got upset. Same with me. Like, you can abuse me all day long. I don't care. I'm still going to do what I got to do for the kingdom of God. But when I noticed that it was other people on a mass scale being hurt so badly by the church, that's when I started my journey.
Right. Yeah. So we're going to talk about a few rather topics or quotes that we just want to first share, and that is accountability and cover-ups. If you haven't seen these things, then I will say you're proving a point that, and now let me say, I have been a part of that problem. So this is not me like condemning anyone here, but we are only shown what we feel like fits within our agenda. What has been seen within the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention Church, and Catholic Church shows just how much Christians are willing to defend their own or hide the truth for the sake of preserving the good that has been done.
My favorite thing is that Protestants will make fun of Catholics and Catholic priests. They make all those jokes, like not realizing they are also Christians.
Yeah.
Catholics are Christians. They worship differently, but they're Christians.
Yeah.
It's all part of the same church.
we have been seeing time and time again leadership within the church ignoring or downplaying cases of abuse. When it comes to Black Lives Matter, when it comes to physical, sexual abuse within the church, guys, I can't actually count how many times I've ever heard it mentioned in our church. I can't. I can't think of times where our church has gone, hey, you know what? This happened elsewhere. This is wrong. Very few times. Very few times. And I think a lot of this revolves around this mentality too, because it's really a toxic leadership that this comes down from. And it comes from this scripture that we were told constantly when being told not to talk about our bad leaders. And that was from Matthew 18. And it's basically, essentially, it's like an order on how you should approach problems within the church. And essentially goes like, bring someone with you. If that doesn't work, bring 2 other people with you. If that doesn't work, bring it to the church. No church actually goes through with that. That line of logic, that verse is used as a shield to make sure that your congregation, your staff, or whoever isn't talking badly behind your back as an excuse of gossip or whatever. No, I'm sorry. Some people are just scared because you might fire them.
Yeah.
As simple as that.
There's the one that they also use for politicians, like all authority is God-given and blah, blah. Like, that's not what that meant, man.
No.
You know that's not what it meant.
So, like, okay, for example, just recently, I mentioned the rise and fall of Mars Hill with Mark Driscoll. He now has a new church in Phoenix. I don't know if you knew this. And this just came out.
I did not know that.
It just came out that he has been rating church members on a scale of 1 to 10 based on loyalty. He hired an investigator to spy on a teenage boy's family who kissed his daughter. And he has everyone on church property under 24/7 surveillance. Guys.
So I'm not surprised, but it's one of those like, oh, yeah, that sounds about right.
He shouldn't be allowed to pastor. Now, granted, you can go like, well, look, people are following him. Sure, granted.
People also followed, what was his name? Jeff Jones?
Oh, yeah.
The guy, the Kool-Aid guy.
Mm-hmm.
Not the actual Kool-Aid man, but the guy that killed a bunch of people with Kool-Aid.
But this is what we're talking about. And this is just scratching the surface because we don't have time to go into all the different cases and stuff. But it's just not being addressed.
Right.
It's just not. Let's move on.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the next quote that we want to come up against, we're not all like this.
Ooh. Okay. So
we know.
Your favorite heretics is a couple. I forgot their names. I feel really bad for not remembering, but they brought up an analogy. The person says, "I'm sorry you went through this, but not every fellowship is like this. Please don't lump them all into this." The heretic says, "I will lump them all together until accountability in the institution is normal and not an anomaly."
Ooh.
The person, again, not all fellowships are like this. You shouldn't judge them all just because you had a bad experience. Heretic. This comment displays Christian fragility. Not all churches equals not all men. How about churches shouldn't abuse instead of you shouldn't judge? You're demonizing the victim instead of holding the institution accountable.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly the way church institution has been training their followers, end quote.
Okay, so the way I like to explain this is like food allergies. So if you have a baby and you give your baby a peanut and your baby swells up like a balloon, obviously not all foods are going to do that. But are you not going to be wary the next time you give your baby a new food?
Yeah.
Like, maybe my baby is allergic to cashews too. Maybe walnuts. Like, I'm just going to, until I can figure out what it is, I'm going to be very cautious about this.
Yeah.
Same thing with this.
Well, and even just, I know we're going to have a whole episode about this, but even concerning race, like, guys, I'm a white male, and granted, I have definitely been a part of the problem, and still to a certain degree am, but I am now at least aware of the problem and will address said problems, whether it's within myself, which I still have to do because of how I was raised and systemic things I was brought up with, but also within others. That's a responsibility I want to take. Does that mean I'm a horrible human piece of trash? No. Does that mean that all white people are trash? No, obviously not. But my point is that I'm now at least going to take the responsibility to address said wrong things.
Right.
See, usually what happens when someone blames a church or the church, the first gut reaction from many Christians is to pull the "don't judge, it's not everywhere" card. But even if it was only like 5% of the churches who are now showing toxic behavior, this is not how you talk to people who have been abused.
Oh, for sure.
Just it's the same rhetoric when it comes to abuse from men. You don't say that to women. You just don't. It's so psychologically, emotionally, spiritually wrong.
And the people that are not all men, not all churches, those are the people to watch out for.
Yeah.
It's like the ones that actually aren't, we know it's not all men and not all churches. So we don't want to perpetuate that problem.
Yeah. And I'll say one last thing regarding this. Bottom line is that there's enough that of these cases that people are leaving the church. We have that evidence. It's not like we're just making this up and like whatever. No, people are leaving the church for a reason. Not because they're hearing stories, because they're experiencing their own. There are enough churches like this that people are simply not going to church and yet holding on to some level of faith. And hear me out. If love conquers all, then the church hasn't been loving enough.
Boom.
Next one up, please.
Let's reconstruct/deconstruct the right way. Bro, like, I don't think you understand what deconstruction is if you think there's one way to do it.
Yeah.
And every other way is wrong.
It's the same mentality. Like,
it's blind privilege.
Yeah. Out of the 45,000 denominations, your way is the right way.
Yeah.
It's the same thought.
That's exactly what it is. That's just, it's ridiculous to even say that.
Yeah. I'm not even going to comment anymore. I think it's just silly and
yeah. There's no reason to go any further than that. You know what you're saying. You know it's ridiculous. Oh my god.
I think we're coming to an end here.
I think so. We're getting pretty close.
Chris, I'll let you continue on here if you want, or you want me to do it.
Let's have you do it.
Yeah. So my experience at this church, particularly, it didn't cause me to deconstruct. It wasn't like, because I can imagine it now. Like, people are like, okay, so you had a bad experience, your leader treated you bad. That doesn't mean you should walk away from the faith. That doesn't mean you should think this way about the Bible.
First off, we're not walking away from the faith.
But even if I was, the point is that it did allow me to open my eyes to the fallacy within our walls, and just as importantly, outside of it. At the bare minimum, even if you believe that it's the culture that is turning everyone around and that it's the world's fault, how we as a church, you as the church, are responding is not working.
Right.
Guys, it's the literal definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. It's not working. There were so many times that it just baffled me when we brought up ideas to the church of like, hey, we should do it this way or this way. Like, nah, just keep doing it this way. If you want to see a transformation, if you want to see a change in people's lives for Jesus, you need to take these issues seriously. People are tired of seeing excess in the church. Think of like preachers in sneakers and how conservative evangelicals are always blaming leftist agendas for Hollywood and its celebrities. We're being hypocrites. We have pastors who are multimillionaires who have huge mansions and private jets and look, I'm not saying owning things like that is wrong necessarily, but when you come from an institution that says that the greatest of these are the poorest of these, and when I know it's not the exact quote, but when you have a belief that it's harder for a rich man to enter to the eye of a needle than to enter the gates of heaven, then I think it might be a good mentality to have that the leadership shouldn't be a multi-million-dollar a millionaire.
Yeah. Well, what was that guy's name? Was it Jesse Duplantis, I think? Like a pastor that obviously he's a mega church pastor. He's on TBN and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
He had millions of dollars, like, personally. And then he had the balls to get up on TV and on stage and say, God told me that I need to buy a brand new Learjet, so I'm taking an offering. Like,
right.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Like, what? Or what's his name? Joel Osteen.
Oh.
We got another hurricane coming to the area. And if that man tries again to lock his doors,
I know.
He is going to be one of the first people that we get when we say eat the rich.
And I know I was stumbling over my words there, and I apologize for getting emotional here, but here's the thing. And I'm passionate about this because it hasn't worked. I believe that most people wouldn't be as upset about the wrongs or the things that people do in the church if the good churches or people were to speak up more and be more accountable for the wrongs.
Yeah.
if you're a Christian listening to this, if you go to a church, if you're a pastor at a church, whatever, don't let others speak for the church. It comes down to you. It's literally that simple. If you want to see the change in the church, then hold it accountable.
Be the change.
Be the change. Don't let people taint it anymore. And that's always baffled me in all this. It's like, why defend or lessen what people do wrong in the church? Why not address it? Why not make it public? Like, no, it's like Cold War. It's like whenever, this is when we're going to get to American nationalism. So it's like during the Cold War, when Christians were the most, like one of the largest demographics to actually want refugees. You know why? Because it was further evidence that everything over there was wrong and what we were doing was right. It's the same mentality. If you want the world to see you as what we should be, as a light to the world, as a representation of Jesus Christ, then freaking stand up for what Jesus Christ would have stood up for.
Oh, yeah.
Be the light. Speak up against evil. Speak up against the wrong. Speak up against injustice, not just within your own church, but as a collective community.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to see a change, as Chris said, we got to be the change.
100%.
Let's wrap this sucker up.
Yeah. So we always want to end this on a more positive note because there is always more than this, and we're not just here to crap on churches. Tim's not just here to crap on churches. So, as I'm sure you could tell in our tone, we're obviously not too pleased with the church as a whole right now, but we do see and believe in churches that can be like Jesus.
Or the idea, anyways.
Yeah, we believe that there are organizations out there that, for better or worse, are trying to be Christ-like, not just Christian, in quotes. I have a hope for what the church can turn into. It's going to take a lot of work, but what motivates me is the deconstructing community, truthfully. People may or may not believe in all the theology they grew up with, but they still want to make the world a better place and spread the love that Jesus has for us all. The people I follow on TikTok, most of them, even if they've gone 180 degrees the other way and became straight up atheist, they still want to put positivity into the world.
Yeah,
they still want to show love. And they're saying, well, the church did it wrong, but I can do it right. And not as like a holier than thou, like, oh, well, I'm better than the church. They're just like, look, I know this was wrong. I know this is right. So I'm going to do the right thing.
Yeah.
That's all it is. In our show notes, we're going to share some of the churches, the leaders, and the people that have inspired us and motivate us.
Yeah.
We may not always agree 100% with their theology or even their methods or what they preach, but we do believe in their message, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah. At the beginning of the episode, you heard Amos chapter 5, verse 21, one of my favorite scriptures in all of the Bible right now. And guys, we want to encourage you as we're ending this podcast to, again, if you haven't already, to like, subscribe, to rate us, to say, comment, talk to us about this stuff. Because, again, this whole point behind this whole purpose is to make you, if this is you, not to feel alone. And you can talk to us privately, publicly, whatever. But we just want to let you know that you're not alone.
And just because we're the ones leading the podcast does not mean that we think we know everything.
Oh, God, no.
We would love to have more views opened up to us so that we can explore those and learn more about the topic that we're already discussing.
Right.
Or a new topic that we haven't even gotten to.
Yep. Chris, you got anything else to say, brother?
No. I think I have said everything that is edifying to say.
Well, guys, this has been the Deconstruction series, part 2, the church. Next week, I don't know what our subject will be, but we are definitely continuing this series.
I will pick one.
We will pick one. And guys, thank you again so much for listening, for being a part of this community, for always believing that there is always more in this. We love you guys, and we'll see you guys next time.
Love you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Deconstruction series on the Always More podcast. Please take a moment to subscribe, rate, comment, and share this wherever you listen to us. Be sure to check out our resources and recommendations in the show notes for both this episode and episodes to come. And lastly, don't forget to listen into our Deconstruction playlist on Spotify that can also be found in our show notes. Thank you, and see you next time.